Well, thank you for that very, very warm introduction, and my thanks to General Senanayake for your kind invitation to appear before this forum. Your Excellency, President Saracena, it's indeed an honor to have you here to show us the way and to, by your presence, just convey how important and significant this particular seminar is. I'd like to join in welcoming the many distinguished leaders and guests. If I went try to get through the list, we'd never be finished this morning, so I'll dispense with that, but it is my distinct honor to be with you, and particularly to be back in Colombo and invited to provide this address. I am sitting here this morning listening to the inaugural words, to see the President come, to see Field Marshal Fonseca, my distinguished colleagues from the military, and to note the presence of the leadership of the country, civilian, military, here for the purpose of thinking about a difficult subject. When I was last in this country, it was a difficult time. In the middle of a tragic civil war that went on for far too long. But I think that as I ponder this occasion, there's some lessons that we should not miss from this event. And the things that come to mind are human beings have been acting in similar ways for as long as recorded history. Some ways very good, some bad. But the example we have here in Sri Lanka is that when things got very bad and you had tragedy that didn't seem to know boundaries, that traumatized the population of the country, tore it apart, that eventually the professionalism of the military was able to prevail and to return, or at least end the instability, and to start the process of restabilizing the country, which has been picked up by the civilian leadership and has worked very hard to change the entire environment in this country. I believe this is a wonderful example for the rest of the world to take note. Two main thrusts. One, that if people are going to be able to live in peace and security, they have to have a secure environment. And that is most likely to be provided by the armed forces of the country and the countries of the world working together. And the second major thought is that if people are going to continue to live and work and enjoy security and the lives that they strive for throughout the world, then we need responsible government to be bold and to step up and take the responsibility to continue to pull people together for today and for the future. And again, I could take my remarks and throw them away because of the feeling that I have that there is no better example on this earth today than what's happened in this country and the potential for a good future. But it is not going to happen without a lot of hard work. And as we, in this forum, take up this subject of violent extremism, we should keep in mind that there's a lot of work to be done. And I think that's really the reason we're here. It's a difficult subject with much work to be done. So let me go back to some prepared remarks to kind of set the stage for further discussion with this very, very distinguished audience of experienced people in many dimensions. And I'll give you the bottom line up front. There is no easy answer to this problem of violent extremism. It's not going to be solved by the military alone. It's not going to be solved with talk. It's going to require a lot of action from the top of our societies to the bottom and the bottom of the top. So this topic of violent extremism is what I would call a hot button item. And the majority of the people in this audience are security people. And there's an expectation from people in all of our societies that the military and security people are ready, willing, and able to protect their populations, because that's what we're supposed to do. Not run countries, protect our people. That's our business. So these next 2 days offer us an opportunity to explore, hopefully to better understand, and perhaps find ways to respond to and limit the harm of this challenge that we face worldwide. I'm certain there are many people in this audience, as I have, that have experienced personally the impact of violent extremism. For myself, back in the 1980s in Lebanon, of course in Iraq and Afghanistan, and on 9/11, 2001, as I served in the Pentagon and lost 42 of my own people that I knew and worked with every day in that tragic hijacking crash into the building. But that's only one of many, many tragic events that have occurred due to the same kinds of behaviors around the world. So I'm certain that subsequent speakers here are going to explore key aspects of this subject in great detail. But I'd like to set the scene with a bit of an overview and then offer some of my own opinions. First, I think we need to start out with a definition, but that's pretty difficult with this topic. It's proven elusive, primarily due to the ideological, cultural, and religious sensitivities of everyone in the world. Ooh, be careful how you characterize this. I propose to define it as a willingness of persons to use or support the use of violence to further particular beliefs or causes, usually of a radical, political, social, religious, or ideological value. Now, we could debate the words here all day, and I'm sure we will later. But the key idea to me is that individuals motivated by views beyond what we would normally accept as in the mainstream of our societies have seen fit to condone and to perform acts that inflict grievous injury and death on fellow citizens around the world. Now, obviously, murder and mayhem have been with mankind for a long time, but this recent wave of violence, mainly perpetrated by non-state actors, is becoming increasingly widespread and seemingly unbounded in the extent in which the adherents are willing to hurt and maim and kill often totally innocent bystanders. Radicalization is another debated term. In my view, it's the process by which perpetrators consider and accept violence as a legitimate behavior, which it is not, but in furthering their extreme views well beyond our legal and rational norms. And this appears to be a prerequisite step in the decline of individuals into this violent extremism. The insecurity resulting from this scourge is unsettling to people around the world. I think that as we debate this issue, we ought to consider the notion of security in the minds of our citizens, whom we're here to serve. As leaders of armed forces of sovereign countries, we traditionally think of security in terms of protecting state borders and populations from external threats. Armies and navies have historically defended against exterior perils, while civilian security organizations maintain order within borders. The situation today is much more complex. The lines are blurred. We find acts of extremism conducted by a wide range of actors for whom borders have no meaning. Some of these actors are state-supported. Majority are executed by members of organizations outside governments who can act locally. They can cross borders individually, or whose ideas metastasize in others, regardless of nationality. So it's a worldwide problem. The widespread, unpredictably, seemingly random occurrence of violence, bloody attacks on innocents, is highly unsettling and disruptive to individual people around the world as they go about their daily lives. And this strikes fear in many who now fundamentally question the safety of their routine activities, leaving their houses, going shopping, doing things that the majority of people think are absolutely normal. Individual security, I have come to learn, is very personal. In my business, when I was a youngster and beginning in this service to my country, I thought in terms of the usual war college description of state actors and international great power struggles and so forth. But I've come to learn that security has a very different meaning to the average citizen. People today feel that this unsettling feeling in their stomachs needs to be fixed. And I think that's why we're here at this symposium. One more term to talk about, and that's terror. Before we move on, terror is not an ideology or a belief. It's a tool. Unfortunately, it's a very ugly tool. It's a weapon of the weak who cannot directly threaten stronger states, but it's a very effective instrument, isn't it, for arousing widespread fear and uncertainty, particularly in our civilian populations. That's the target audience. So we have a broad array of people here today, participants from around the world with wonderful learned backgrounds in governance and academia and the military and the law, intelligence, science, international organizations of every stripe. They offer us a rich menu to digest and hopefully indicate some beneficial suggestions going forward. But before we go any further, can I offer a suggestion? And it's this. Given the extent of the challenge and the fact that the manifestations of this issue are unbound by borders, governments, or political systems, that we acknowledge this as our problem. In English, O-U-R, our problem collectively. Not his problem or her problem or their problem, our problem. I think we have to resist the urge to hand this off to one entity, one part of government, one aspect of our lives, the security forces, the whatever. It's too complex. We need to accept the responsibility that the idea in mind is that we're going to have to work closely together across many organizations if we have any chance of changing the present trajectory. Will you join me, at least for the next few minutes, in taking this up as our problem? The first order is to understand the phenomenon. What is it? How is it? Why it is what it is? Whether it is or is not something new, perhaps a remanifestation of something in the past. We tend, particularly in today's age with instant technology and the distractions of these things we look at, video, the remembrance of history sometimes fades away pretty quickly. There's not a whole lot new in the way of human behavior out there. We could probably learn from it. Security professionals, as most of you in this audience are people who are looking for practical solutions, right? So academic discussions are interesting. They provide good background, good food for thought, but most of us are looking for something we can put our hands on and say, okay, here's a tool, let's do something. So as we consider potential ways to counter this scourge, I think we should look carefully at the impact of governance as the first order of business. The political systems, laws, policies, and mechanisms of governmental actions in all of our countries. It's my experience that ungoverned or poorly governed areas of the world, inherently insecure and unstable, with a host of accompanying social ills, are fertile breeding grounds for misery, conflict, and then radical attempts to change the status quo. These initiatives, born of frustration and typically executed by persons who are ill-equipped to deal with the underlying factors, usually exacerbate a downward spiral of distress, exodus, migrations. Think for a minute, if you would, of the millions of people today in this world that are on the move, just trying to escape the scourge that we're here to talk about. These conditions offer a ready supply of recruits ready to sign up for this extremist ideology. Thus, governance ought to be very high on any list of considerations in approaching ways to counter this global threat. The literature, of course, is replete with prescriptions of economic solutions to the underlying causal factors as a way to diminish the predisposition and a likelihood of violence. No doubt a contributing factor to the problem. But economic inequality and distress are not easily remedied without basic good governance and the positive influence of the actions of responsible government. Education is the most common panacea that's offered to remedy our problem. Now, this should be a healthy contributing factor in countering these tendencies, these extremist tendencies. But there are examples of some very highly educated people, aren't there? As well as some from economically advantaged backgrounds that have become influenced and, in fact, even lead these extremist ideas. The contribution of communities, religious leaders, families, in shaping values and traditions through example and instruction could be very significant, particularly for our young people. This is a proactive approach in which a maturing and supporting environment, demonstrating respect for traditions, laws, normative behavior, respect for legitimate authority, is conveyed and reinforced by families and local social networks. Extremely important. Suggested specific roles and missions for the armed forces, for the intelligence community, the civilian law enforcement, government, international organizations. They're going to be teed up for detailed examination later today and tomorrow. How to use these traditional instruments of security while considering the contributions of so-called soft power options should be an interesting discussion. The new domains of the cyber world and also the concept of fourth-generation warfare, also described as gray zone conflict or constrained military operations, provide additional topics for consideration. I would tell you that from my view, the world got a glimpse of this kind of new, ill-defined, hazy gray challenge right here in Sri Lanka in decades not that far past. So what about the way ahead? Violent extremism is an activity with serious consequences for our societies. It commands worldwide high interest and attention, but to date's eluded efforts to craft a comprehensive solution. My assessment is that it would be totally wishful thinking to expect that we could undertake any single activity or even a series of actions to cause the challenge of violent extremism to disappear. Not going to happen. There are just too many people on this earth with too many issues, and just consider the scope, if you would, of one current scourge. Daesh, what is, should say now, hopefully was, the size of a small army. So look at the extremes. Individuals and thousands of adherents to craziness that inflicts damage. However, I'm convinced that with the right mindset, working collectively on our problem with thoughtful, comprehensive, mutually supporting actions across many levels of government, we can significantly improve the situation. So I view this thing, and I'm going to skip through this because I don't want to drag this out. But in my mind, I postulated things that I call top level, lower level, grassroots level, and in between. But the key objective to keep in mind is the statement that I believe we can reduce the fear factor and insecurity in our publics. Again, back to who do we serve? Our people. How do we do this? By restoring their confidence in the ability of governments to provide effective security, and by building public resilience, a term that's kind of faded away recently. It applies to individuals and governments. Here are my thoughts on some specific steps to work the problem in parallel, which has to happen from multiple levels, international and local. But to make a difference, we need to do something that, from my background in the Navy, we used to call all hands on deck. All hands on deck. This is everybody pitching in, grabbing a line, putting our shoulder to the wheel. Each organization that has a dog in this fight, and that's all of us, needs to step up. At the top, a host of things that can be done at international and national levels. In the middle, better policies to improve governance, more comprehensive internal security policies to address infrastructure, population, infrastructure protection, population security, education policies, re-emphasizing tolerance, adherence to law, and so forth. At the grassroots level, people don't start out as bad actors with these evil intentions and designs. They get there somehow. And so, what about all of us pushing for and assuming greater responsibility at the grassroots level? Families, our churches, religious places of worship, in our community settings. More emphasis on the value of cooperation and volunteer assistance among members of the community for the common good. Not me, you individually, but the common good. Conclusion. The key idea here is to change from being reactive, chasing the criminals and investigating the who, how, and why after the fact, but to be more proactive and to try to preempt these untoward activities. We need to focus much more of our effort, again in the vernacular, to the left of boom. So there's a series of events that lead up to explosions of all types. And we tend to focus on the explosion and the aftermath. Who's guilty? Who do we hunt down? Baloney, forget it. Let's get to the left of this. Let's start thinking and acting before these events occur. Think of the possibilities if we had really good intelligence collaboration. I mean, true collaboration around the world. Not the way it's done today, not the, I've got a secret. I'll tell you maybe, but no. We need to share the good intelligence. We need to actually improve governance, not talk about it, get it done. No more talk, action, results, results, results. Communities need to take initiative. Pay attention to what's going on right in their own neighborhoods. Do something about it. If it's bad behavior, fix it. After all, adults are supposed to lead, aren't they? Bottom lines are this. We're unlikely to be effective in countering this violent extremism until we recognize it as a global menace that requires an all-encompassing, all-aspect, across-the-board, cooperative effort. We need a thoughtful, comprehensive, disrupting approach which will saturate, preempt, and fundamentally change the operating space of these violent extremists. So there's a new piece of technology that's beginning to make its way into our security lexicon. You've heard the term swarm, S-W-A-R-M in English. Okay? Swarm of bees, swarm of birds. Now we see swarms of unmanned vehicles in the air, undersea. We want to swarm. We want to swarm against this problem of violent extremism. Thank you very much for your kind attention. It's a great honor to be here, Mr. President. Sincerely honored by your presence and that of your ministers, other distinguished leaders in the audience. It's great to be with you. Have a wonderful day and a good conference. Thank you.